Today we'll be talking about why you shouldn't rush to the marathon. Now, I know a lot of people will have different opinions on this, and all I ask is that you watch the whole video before you comment negativity or whatever, because I think I do have some solid points that I do want to explore. And with a lot of people getting injured nowadays, I do attribute some of that to people progressing in distance a bit too quickly. And in this video, I'm going to talk about motivation, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic, and then I'll talk about physiological adaptations and its injury risk without having those adaptations, followed by talking about mental burnout and the time commitment also required to train for a marathon. And then we'll talk more about the progression of distances from 5K all the way up to the marathon. And to conclude, we'll talk about how your first experience in a marathon will be much better if you do follow all these steps. So that's the structure of the video, and let's get right into it. Before we talk about physiological adaptations, I quickly want to acknowledge motivation behind why you're doing these things. So I think that you can move to the marathon straight away if you are doing it for intrinsic reasons. Is it because you want to see if you can complete a marathon? Is it to challenge yourself to do something you haven't done before? Fair enough then, I'm not going to stop you, but I think it's still worth listening to what I'm about to say about physiological adaptations and also the rest of the video, and that might change your mind and you might want to start from something shorter and work your way up. But again, if your motivations are intrinsic, then I'm not stopping you. I think that's a very commendable thing, to be able to do something because you want to, truly from the inside. But on the contrary, there's a thing called extrinsic motivation, and that's stuff like, I want to do a marathon because everyone else is doing it around me. I want to do a marathon because I wouldn't be a runner if I haven't done a marathon yet. But that's all extrinsic. You're influenced by external factors, which I don't think is a good idea in terms of the risk that you put yourself in through marathon training and racing a marathon without being prepared for it. Another question to ask yourself is, are you here for the long term or are you here to run a marathon? If you're looking a few years ahead, I think it is worth reconsidering whether you think it's the best option to go straight to the marathon or to work up over a year or two to the marathon. I think you need to look beyond what you want to do in the marathon and let that kind of decide when you think it's a good time to do the marathon. If you're planning on running for years, decades, then why would you need to do a marathon in 6 months' time? So look at the overarching bigger picture long-term plan and then decide from there what you should do in the medium term and short term. So, physiological adaptations. There's no real shortcuts to it, and all these adaptations take a different amount of time. And I get comments all the time, how long will it take till I get adapted to whatever? But it's a spectrum. It's not like you go from not adapted to adapted. It's a gradual process, so there's no time frame that I have in mind. And I don't think anyone has an answer to that because there's just not enough studies being done, and we all know that there's individual variances. So the amount of time it takes for you to adapt to these physiological adaptations will depend on the person, sporting background, training history, everything. Running's complicated, that's why we all love the sport. It's more than just putting one foot in front of the other, there's a lot of nuance to it. Now, the first adaptation that I want to talk about is bone remodeling. So when you first start running, your bones actually won't be as dense as it is further into your running journey. When you look at a cyclist, they do tend to have less bone density because their sport is not weight bearing. Obviously, they have a mechanical apparatus, fancy word, which they use for the sport. Same with swimming. It's not weight bearing. But in running, when your foot is striking the ground with force every single step, I think adding that stimulus forces your bones to actually remodel, become stronger, become more resilient, become denser, and that process does take a lot of time. Another thing I want to quickly add on to that though is that carbohydrates play a huge role in bone remodeling, and therefore in a sport like running where you use up your glycogen stores, aka carbohydrates, you want to be eating enough carbohydrates so that you one, can get through the session through the energy produced by the glycogen storage, but also you want to be eating enough so that your bone can remodel. So as runners, we're doing more exercise than the typical person. We actually do need to be mindful about how much we're eating, and we need to eat as much as we possibly can, usually. But what we eat matters as well because different foods will trigger the body in different ways. Obviously, if we're having refined sugar, that's good if you are exercising that day, if you're having it before the run or even during the run. But that's like quick release carbs. You get the energy kind of immediately. That's why we talk about that sugar rush or spike in energy. But when we just have like regular carbs, it's slow release. I want to divert from this notion of how sugar is bad for you because it's bad for your teeth, but it's actually not bad in terms of exercise and performance-oriented benefits. Next up, we're going to talk about tendon adaptations. What is a tendon? A tendon connects the muscle to the bone. It's a fibrous connective tissue, and the tendons play a role on facilitating movement because the muscle contracts and that pulls on the tendon, which pulls on the bone. So when the tendon is crossing a joint, it acts on that joint. Now this means it does play a pretty integral role in terms of keeping your body together and also producing the energy, because it is a sort of like an elastic tissue. And a lot of the energy and proportion that you need for running does come from the tendon. The tendon plays a crucial role in that. Namely the Achilles. The Achilles is like the most significant tendon in the lower leg, which helps out with running a lot. It connects to the soleus and the gastrocnemius, so connects those two muscles to the calcaneus in the heel. Obviously that acts on the ankle joint, and that ankle joint plays a huge role in terms of toe off and propelling you forward. We know that the tendon must be very integral. It's a lot of load is going through that structure, so we need those tendons to be able to handle the load and also propel you forward and give you that elastic energy return sort of thing. And I'm sure you can imagine that it takes a bit of time for those tendons to adapt and be able to handle that load. And pushing straight to the marathon isn't always a good idea, because you want to promote longevity, focus on slow progress towards the marathon. Next up, we're talking about the heart and the cardiovascular development as you run more. I'm sure you've all heard the heart is a muscle, and the stronger the heart beats, the more blood is pumped per beat, and that means that less heart rate is required. So you're going to naturally see a lower heart rate over time because your heart gets stronger. It's able to handle pumping more blood, and that adaptation takes quite a while as well. And stressing that heart very early on, running so much, overworking the heart when it's not ready. For a beginner runner, you don't have established zones. You don't have zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And even if you do, you're going to go from zone 1 to zone 5 very quickly. And therefore, marathon pace is going to be a tough effort for a lot of people, and you're holding that for a very long time. That's a very stressful thing for your heart to go through. So it takes time to develop that. Same thing with capillarization. I always talk about it. Capillaries are what connects the artery to the vein. The artery brings blood from the heart to the muscles, but via the capillaries. And the capillaries connect to the veins, which bring blood back up to the heart. The capillaries usually surround the muscles to promote oxygen delivery to the muscles, because again, running is very aerobic and we want to rely on our oxidative system, and we need that oxygen to be able to convert to energy and be able to run for a long period of time. And if you don't have a lot of capillaries surrounding the muscle like this, you're actually starting with not many capillaries. But we want to increase our capillary network and have way more surface area kind of thing connecting to the muscles, delivering oxygen to the muscle. And that takes a little bit of time as well. You need to do a lot of easy running, and you need to kind of stress the system in a healthy way in order to promote that. And again, going straight from nothing to a marathon, it's very stressful for the body. Moving on to energy systems, we know that running is aerobic. We rely on oxygen, but what we also rely on is the glycogen storage and converting glycogen into energy. And at the start, we have a set glycogen storage capacity, I guess you can call it. And over time, as we stress the system healthily, gradually over time, we're going to make our body adapt over time and increase our capacity to store more glycogen so that we can run for longer and not hit the wall. We always hear about beginners hitting the wall in the marathon, and that is predominantly because you don't store as much glycogen as someone that's been running for multiple years. Obviously, running out of glycogen means that you rely more on fat as a fuel, and that's not as efficient, and you're probably gonna have to slow down even if you don't want to. You have to. There's no option. Your body will just naturally force you to slow down. And we don't want to get there, but we can't have a huge glycogen storage without having done the miles and stretching the system over a long period of time. This adaptation takes a long time. And so if you want a good experience for your first marathon and to not hit the wall, then you probably do want to be running for a long period of time before you run your first marathon. And on top of that, we have mitochondrial density. Mitochondria, we all know, powerhouse in a cell, plays a huge role in the oxidative system, and it takes time for the density of mitochondria to increase as well, providing you with more energy, giving you that advantage over someone that's completely new to running, that hasn't done running for that long. And moving on to muscle fiber type, we've heard about fast twitch muscle fibers, slow twitch muscle fibers. Everyone starts with a different ratio of fast twitch and slow twitch and whatnot. There's more types of muscle fibers, by the way, but simplifying it, those are the two main ones. For a sport like the marathon where you're running for multiple hours, it's beneficial to have more slow twitch muscle fibers. And doing a lot more slow running is going to promote that change in fiber ratio to have more slow twitch muscle fibers. Obviously, that's going to play a bit of a role in helping you be able to run for longer because the slow twitch muscle fibers are more efficient and they let you go for a longer period of time. So that change in muscle fiber composition will play a role as well to an extent. And finally, neuromuscular coordination. Neuromuscular just means nerves to muscles. Your nerves communicate to the muscle, that requires coordination. When anyone starts any sport, they're gonna be a bit awkward in terms of their movements, but as you run more, you become more efficient, you run with better form. And when you do these fatigue-inducing long runs like marathons and stuff, you are gonna be running with terrible form at the end if you're not used to, just running for a long period of time and working up to that as well. Running shorter distances increases your efficiency. And also, I always talk about how when you run quick, you're forced to run with good form. You can't run quick with bad form. So focusing on the shorter distances, getting really good at it and progressing forward is gonna allow you to run with better form in the marathon. And that goes a long way in terms of injury prevention as well. So neuromuscular coordination is one other thing to consider. Now let's talk about mental burnout and time commitments. Obviously, marathon training takes a lot of time out of your day. And if you already work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, it's gonna require a lot of extra time dedicated to training for the marathon. It's not easy. If you wanna do it right, you kind of do have to train a fair amount. Whereas training for a 5K doesn't require as much time at the start. And you can see if you enjoy that sort of thing first before you move on to the next distance. It's also very high risk, high reward. Like, you're risking a lot with marathon training. It doesn't even always pay off when it's your first marathon. Not everyone has a good first experience in the marathon. To be honest, barely anyone does. Most people hit the wall and get cramps and stuff. So it's very likely that everyone is gonna go through that for the first marathon, which is why you might as well be even more prepared for it to mitigate and lower the chances of having a bad first experience in the marathon. I think first experiences for anything plays a crucial role in someone's perception of something. If I go somewhere and I have a bad time, that's gonna have a huge bias in terms of how I perceive that, environment, whether it's a run club or a new sport that I wanna try. If I have a bad time the first time I try it, probably not gonna be coming back. Probably not gonna be doing it long term. So I think if you wanna enjoy running for the long term, it is worth considering starting at a shorter distance. So now we'll talk about building that foundation and progressing through the distance. Journey over destination. I think that moving straight to the marathon gets rid of all the fun of doing your first 5K, doing your first 10K, doing your first half marathon. All these are huge milestones in your running journey, and I'd hate to skip out on all of that, go straight to the marathon and have to work backwards. If that's how you want to do things, fair enough. But at the same time, building the foundation from running a 5K and building up is super important. Like I touched on earlier, 5K is pretty quick. It's faster than a marathon. You're gonna teach yourself how to run efficiently, run at good speeds, and then that builds that foundation for the next distance, which is the 10K. We all know that if you can't run a 15-minute 5K, you're never gonna be able to run a 30-minute 10K. So it all stems back to speed, and we can build that foundation and then work our way up. It's also easier to pace a 5K than a marathon, and slowly working your way up will give you that better racing IQ, and you'll probably run a lot better in the marathon if you have that experience with doing a 5K, 10K half. If you think about me, for example, I started with the 5K, worked up to the 10K, and I took ages to move up to the half marathon. And then I basically did an ultra marathon, and then did a marathon as a jog, and then I went back to the ultra marathon. So I did somewhat follow that progression of 5K, 10K, half marathon. I guess ultra marathon first, like a 50K, back down to a 42K, then back up to an ultra marathon like 80Ks, 100Ks, 137Ks. And I truly appreciated every time I moved up in distance because it felt like I was progressing in this sport. And because I'm here to run for years and years, like I want to be 90 years old and still running, I kind of appreciate the fact that I managed to experience my first everything. Moving on to not conforming to society and doing it just for the sake of the fact that everyone does it, it goes back to what I said earlier about motivation, extrinsic motivation. We don't want to do something because external factors are influencing you to. Like, it doesn't matter that all your friends around you have done a marathon. I feel like the more time passes by, there's more of that culture where marathon is seen as that gold standard, that gateway to being a proper runner and whatnot. Obviously, not everyone's gonna say this. We're not all that toxic, but I still feel like there is that sort of culture. And that's not anyone's fault. But I encourage you to divert from social norms, try and challenge yourself to go against it and to do things in the right order. Stay integral to yourself and be happy with the progress. And as a person that did slowly work up the distances, I can tell you it's so much more fulfilling. And it doesn't make you any less of a runner if you haven't done a marathon yet. I did my first marathon in 2023. And I started running in like 2015. And even then it was just a jog. And I don't plan on racing my first marathon until I'm ready for it, because I know that it is very, very hard. I've done ultras, arguably that's harder, but in other ways, running a marathon is harder because you're running very quick for a very long time. I think it is kind of the pinnacle of athletic ability in a sense. And again, this is me unintentionally adding to the culture of how running a marathon is like the pinnacle of running. And again, I'm not trying to do that, but even me trying to make a video about not rushing to a marathon is accidentally saying running a marathon is a big deal, right? But that should also be another reason why you should work up to it, because like I said, it's really tough. You're running fast for a long period of time. So it would require a lot of time to train for it. So would it be something like, oh, I'm gonna start out to a marathon in a few months and just do it and get it done, you know? Like it would be something that you would look at training for at least a year, I would say. And there's no right amount, so I didn't get this 1 year rule from anywhere. But I'm saying, for example, it would be nice to think a year ahead, but ideally more like a very long-term project, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line. So as usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of what I said? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Am I gonna get a lot of hate comments? I have absolutely no idea, and I'm excited to see how people respond to this video. Again, I think there's nothing wrong if you intrinsically want to complete a marathon just to challenge yourself and you're not affected by external factors. Do things because you want to. Do things because you want to prove it to yourself. Don't do things because everyone else is doing it. I think that's the biggest thing. Most things I do in life revolve around this mindset. I think I'm not a normal guy. It's just my life path, and my life path is going to be different to everyone. Don't do what everyone does. Don't go straight to the marathon. Journey before destination. If you don't enjoy the journey, then what's the point, right? Because the journey is what you spend most of your time doing. The destination is almost never, because as soon as I get to whatever the destination is, I'm always focused on the next goal. So that's how I would look at it. And yeah, you should look at it that way as well. Leave a like, comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.